I am here with Jack Claffey, formerly Gentleman Jack Gallagher, formerly Jack Toxic, I believe. Jack, I guess that's a point to start, or a good as point to start as any. When you moved into your fighting career, was there any thought of going under one of your former ring names, or did you want to kind of separate yourself from that as you go forward?
I don't know. It felt strange to use a fictional name for a real life sport. I don't think Jack Toxic probably would have worked either. Frankly, as well, the WWE has the copyright to Jack Gallagher as well, so might as well just go with the family main name, make things simple, just cut out the middleman.
I actually kind of like the Jack Toxic name, but fair enough. And, the transition is going to be a big talk. We've seen a lot of pro wrestling figures cross over. MMA is no stranger to pro wrestling, obviously, and vice versa. But, you took a couple of amateur fights even before signing with the WWE. So was this something that you had always intended to do?
Yeah, it was it's very interesting because it was about, I think it was 2016. I had my last amateur fight and I was scheduled to have a third coming up, and then I got the offer to be contracted with the WWE. So it was a case of, at the time, I was considering winding down the pro wrestling anyway, and trying out MMA because I had had quite a semi-successful independent career. Like, I'd managed to travel to Japan, I'd done some stuff in Europe, and I just never had done anything in America. I actually didn't think WWE was ever going to be a possibility. So when the opportunity came around, I thought, okay, whatever happens with this will be like the last thing I do in wrestling. And then we'll just see where I am at the end of that. And it just happens to be that by the end of it, I haven't accrued enough injuries to the point where I'm completely crippled at this point. So I can still make another go at the MMA thing and just kind of challenge myself. Obviously, it's not going to be the same, being that now I'm 33 as opposed to the youthful 26 I was when I was originally doing it. So now it's just a little bit more of a challenging myself and trying out something new and just yeah, trying to improve myself as well.
How did you get into the martial arts side of things originally?
Um, Bruce Lee and Dragon Ball Z were probably the two biggest reasons. When I was a kid, I ended up doing traditional martial arts from quite a young age. So I did Taekwondo from a really quite young age. And then at the age of about 16, I stopped doing it so that I could pursue professional wrestling training. So there's always been the back and forth. And then around the age of 20 or so, I started training in catch wrestling, and then Brazilian Jiu Jitsu as kind of like I thought of it as like supplementary training to my professional wrestling, kind of assuming that if I could legitimately do some of the holds, some of them would come across as a little more realistic, or at least give me better ideas of what to do in the ring. And I think that kind of translated to, obviously, I had a very technical style of professional wrestling.
When you decided to make the transition back to MMA, was there anyone that you kind of saw as a blueprint to what you were doing? I mean, we've seen everyone from Ken Shamrock and Dan Severn back in the day to Brock Lesnar and Bobby Lashley to CM Punk in more modern times. Was there anybody you looked at and said, "This is kind of the route I want to follow," or are you just kind of forging your own path?
I think I'm forging my own path. For I think four out of the people you mentioned there, like Bobby, Brock, Ken, Dan Severn, slightly bigger and more enhanced than I am, obviously, and obviously Phil, CM Punk didn't really have any MMA experience to my knowledge, didn't have any martial arts experience, so. I guess to a certain extent it's similar with him in that I was coming into it at a later age, but obviously I'm kind of just trying to forge my own path. The person I would most like to be is Kazushi Sakuraba, but I realize that's more of a pipe dream. So in terms of professional wrestlers turned MMA fighters, that would be the ideal.
You mentioned Sakuraba, the Gracie Hunter. Were you a Pride fan back in the day?
Oh, I love Pride. That's what originally got me into MMA, was watching Kazushi Sakuraba. He was like my original sort of like love affair with MMA. So I preferred Pride before the UFC, and I kind of hung on to like, no, Pride is the best one, and they always have the best people. For quite a while, I was very reticent to actually switch over and watch more American focused MMA for quite some time.
Well, pride never die. Last May you take the fight with BKFC, you get the big win. I mean, what was that feeling for you? And as bare knuckle, because bare knuckle's kind of exploded in the past couple of years, is that still on the table for you as well?
Yeah, I'd hoped to actually do some back-to-back fights with BKFC, but unfortunately, the very first punch that I took burst a blood vessel in my eye, which apparently is very super rare. The doctors backstage even took a picture of like my eye and said, "Oh, we'll show this at a convention. This is quite an abnormality." But it did mean that I was out of training for a little bit. Like it impaired my vision for a little while. Like it sorted itself out, but it just needed time to heal. But it threw off my training plans because originally I think we had hoped to do that fight, and they had a London card coming up quite soon afterwards, and I was attempting to get on that. In fact, David Feldman told me that at the event, he's like, if you can get out of this one with a good win, we'll have you on that London card. And then when that wasn't a possibility, I got another fight offered to me, but I still hadn't even gotten back to even semi-regular training at that point. And that's when the MMA opportunities started opening up as well. So I ended up obviously pursuing a couple more MMA training paths.
And then, you go from the high of the win in May, you go into your pro debut in MMA in December. Obviously, that didn't go your way. As they say, you win or you learn. What did you take away from that fight?
Um, I think featherweight's going to be the right weight class for me. I originally looked at sort of my body proportions and my reach, and I convinced myself I should be a bantamweight. And I think it was just I pushed my body a little too much. I think by the time I realized that it wasn't the weight class for me, I'd already committed to doing the fight. So I tried my best to be in as good a physical shape as I could, but I was more just disappointed with it, honestly. I think it was a sigh of relief after the fight where I thought, okay, I was right in the fact that this was the wrong thing to be doing.
How much weight were you cutting to make bantamweight? And I guess comparatively, how much are you going to have to cut for this featherweight fight?
In terms of an actual cut, it's probably about 10 pounds coming off for the featherweight cut. We dieted me down, so my coach, my strength and conditioning coach, didn't want me using a huge amount of dehydration to get me down to the weight class because in terms of the long term that's got a lot of negative health benefits. So we tried to diet me down to where I was only cutting around 10 to 15 again, but obviously it meant that my frame was around 10 pounds lighter than I was used to. It meant my cheekbones were very well defined for about a month, but it was just a bit of a miserable experience. Honestly, it wasn't necessarily the cut; it was the lack of energy. I was doing so much work to keep the weight off of me that I just wasn't getting enough skill development time in there, if that makes sense.
Definitely does. And you mentioned your coach, and I believe you're working with a strength and conditioning coach as well. Who are you working with ahead of this fight?
Same people right now. I'm working with the coaches at Fighting Fit Manchester. So I've got my head coach is Martin Cahill. He's always been my jiu-jitsu coach and grappling coach. I've got Josh Cook, who's my main boxing and striking coach. I've got Kate Wapples, who is my main strength and conditioning coach. And I retain contact with there's a gym in Florida called The Jungle. I think probably the most well-known fighter out there was Felicia Spencer, who fought Cyborg and Amanda Nunes. So I trained there for some time while I was living in Florida. So I keep in contact with Mike Lee, who's one of the coaches out of there, and he often gives me advice about preps and warm-ups and just general mindset and stuff like that.
Good stuff. Now, obviously, you've got this fight on June 6th, I believe, Hexagone 8. Your opponent, Yashin Chateau, I might not be pronouncing that right, so apologies to him if I'm not. He's fighting at home. Do you try and play up the English-French rivalry, do a little bit of mind games, pull from the pro wrestling playbook, so to speak? Or at this point in your career, are you better off just focusing on the fight and getting the rounds in?
I think it's a little bit of focusing on the fight and getting the rounds in. I think I've just real quick. I believe it's June 3rd. I'm pretty sure it's going to be the fight date. Sorry to do the actually, correction.
No worries.
But yeah, but honestly, I'm a little bit anti like nationalism. Like, despite the fictional character that I played in WWE, I think it's a bit weird when people get very rah rah about their country. So even though I get the English flag associated with me quite a bit, it's why I'm just waving the pirate flag. Everybody can stand under the Jolly Roger.
And you're going with the Captain Jack nickname.
Yes, sir. I live on a boat, sir. So yes.
You live okay, I didn't know that. You live a houseboat, I take it.
Yes, sir. Yeah, I live on well, currently on the Navigator right now. Yeah, we're in a narrow boat on the British canals.
Is that like a love of travel, a love of moving around that you have? What was the drive for that?
Combination of travel and I love the countryside. After, like I said, I lived in Florida for about 5 years. So after living in a very touristy, very hot city, I just kind of wanted to go somewhere quiet. And yeah, the love of travel as well. Every now and again, we'll get the cruising going when it's not winter and move up and down the canals, just pottering somewhere new. Obviously, during camp, we have to moor up for a few weeks while I'm just going to be regular. But in between camps, we call it walkabout. We'll just go walkabout for a few weeks and kind of disappear off of the grid.
Very cool. Getting back to the fight, June 3rd, like you said, your opponent has a little bit more experience than you. He's also got a few kickboxing fights, so you know his stand-up is probably going to be decent. How much have you seen of him, and what are you expecting in this case?
I think, I've seen him, as you say, I've seen him kickbox and I've seen him fight in MMA. So I think we have a relatively good idea about an all around skill set. In his MMA fights, there was a lot of grappling involved. People realize he's a kickboxer and try and take him down. So I've got to see what he does on the ground, particularly on the bottom, defensive. And I've seen him fight in kickboxing as well. Obviously, he has a particular strength. I think boxing, in terms of a striking art, is different from kickboxing. So I think I can approach the striking differently. And I'm pretty well versed in grappling too. So if we do manage to take him down, I'm pretty confident in my ability to actually keep him down.
You mentioned obviously you started Taekwondo earlier. You got into Jiu-Jitsu later to supplement the wrestling training. How long did it take to get comfortable on the ground and then to mix in wrestling as well?
Um, I don't know if you're ever like truly comfortable on the ground, like even after doing it for so many years. We have this constant talk at the gym, like we have white belts starting all the time going, when does it get easy? And I said, well, it's never easy because the minute you're beating the white belts, the blue belts become a trouble, and the minute you're beating the blue belts, the purple belts become a bigger issue. So I'd like to say I feel comfortable with the vast majority of people I train with, but there's still those people in the room that make me feel like I've never done a class in my life.
Gotcha. Now, a lot is going to be made of the wrestling connection. We've talked about it a little. It gets kind of silly sometimes, judging which one's better, or this or that, and I'm not going to go there. But one thing that is kind of interesting is the talk of injuries and which is more grueling. Because I've heard from various guys that pro wrestling can actually be a little rougher on the health overall. What have you found thus far in your fighting career? Which one was more grueling in terms of the injuries and the wear and tear on the body?
Um, I don't think wrestling is more grueling. I don't think MMA is more grueling. I think travel is more grueling than anything else. And obviously, with professional wrestling, there's a significant travel portion. With this fight coming up, I get to stay at home for 2 months. I get to train, see my friends very regularly, have a very regular sleep and diet schedule and workout schedule with the WWE. And I was on quite a limited schedule. I wasn't one of the main event guys who was at every single show, but I was still away for the vast majority of the week. It was getting up in the morning, traveling out the day before, doing TV, traveling to the next place, doing another TV, maybe having a live event. Then, you get to fly home, you spend a day asleep, sort of recovering. Maybe you have a day to yourself if you're lucky, and then you're kind of right back on the road. And it was the constant air travel, the being in cars for long periods of time. I think that beats you up more than anything else because you've got these bumps and bruises, and rather than actually recovering, you're sat hunched over for several hours trying to stay awake just so you can get to the next town and actually have a sleep. So yeah, the most dangerous thing in the world is a really long journey.
Gotcha. And that's an interesting take. I appreciate the insight. Last one before I let you go, kind of on the wrestling front again. And again, thanks for the time. I really do appreciate it, Jack. Um, you haven't wrestled since the end of your WWE career. There are other opportunities out there. AEW now has come on strong. There's guys who can make a fair amount of money on the indies. Have you considered it all ever going back, or is that door completely closed?
I say it's like 90% closed. As I said, when I was signing to WWE, I thought of this as my last run in whatever I was going to do. Because in my mind, I thought, okay, this is kind of the top of the business. At the time, AEW didn't exist, so there wasn't a legitimate competitor. Um, and yeah, I just kind of made that mental sign off of like, when I'm done with this, I'll be done, and then I'll try and move on and do something different. I say 90% closed because I occasionally get offers now and again to work. And it's not that interests me. It's that if they ever did a 205 Live reunion tour and they managed to get every single person of that roster back together in one room, somehow magically together, I'd be willing to do that because I'm missing a lot of those guys regularly now that I'm back in England. And also, there's some really phenomenal talent that I didn't get to work with as much as I like.
Fair enough. Well, maybe someday. In the meantime, the fight June 3rd, Hexagon 8. Best of luck, and thanks again for the time, Jack.
Thank you very much, sir.
You have a great day.
You too.
Cheers.